Today, I want to talk about a place that has become one of the most controversial prisons in the United States, Rikers Island. Located in New York City, Rikers Island is not just a jail, it is a symbol of violence, overcrowding, fear, and a broken justice system. Thousands of people pass through Rikers every year. Many of them have not even been convicted of a crime yet. They are waiting for trial because they cannot afford bail. This means people can spend weeks or months inside one of America's toughest jails before they are proven guilty. Rikers Island has gained a reputation for dangerous conditions. Reports have described violence between inmates, abuse, poor medical care, and mental health crises. Guards and prisoners alike have faced unsafe situations. For many people, surviving Rikers becomes a daily struggle. One shocking fact is that a large number of inmates suffer from mental illness. Instead of receiving proper treatment, many end up trapped in an environment that can make their condition even worse. This raises serious questions about how society handles crime, poverty, and mental health. The story of Rikers Island also highlights inequality in America. Wealthy individuals can often pay bail and avoid jail, while poor people remain locked up simply because they lack money. This creates a justice system that does not treat everyone equally. However, change is being discussed. Activists, lawmakers, and community leaders have called for reforms and even the closure of Rikers Island. They argue that prisons should focus on rehabilitation, safety, and human dignity instead of punishment alone. Rikers Island teaches us an important lesson. A society should not be judged only by its wealth or power, but by how it treats its most vulnerable people. If prisons become places of fear and suffering instead of justice and reform, then the entire system must be questioned. In conclusion, Rikers Island is more than just a jail. It is a warning about what happens when justice, equality, and humanity are ignored. Understanding its reality can inspire us to demand a fairer and more compassionate system for everyone. Rikers Island has earned a reputation as one of the most dangerous and troubled jail complexes in the United States. For decades, news reports, investigations, and former inmates have described the facility as a place filled with violence, fear, tension, and overcrowding. The jail houses thousands of inmates every year, including people accused of serious crimes as well as individuals waiting for trial who have not yet been convicted. One of the biggest reasons Rikers Island is considered dangerous is the high level of violence inside the facility. Fights between inmates are common, and many prisoners live in constant fear of being attacked, threatened, or forced into gangs for protection. In some cases, violence has also involved correction officers, leading to accusations of excessive force and abuse. This stressful environment creates tension that can quickly turn into physical conflict. Overcrowding has also been a major issue. When too many inmates are kept in limited space, living conditions become difficult. Cells may become crowded, resources become limited, and frustration among inmates increases. This pressure often leads to arguments, aggression, and mental stress. Many inmates describe life inside Rikers as emotionally exhausting and physically unsafe. Another serious concern is the condition of the buildings and facilities. Some parts of the jail have been criticized for being old, poorly maintained, and lacking proper sanitation. Inmates and staff have reported problems such as poor ventilation, unhealthy living conditions, and limited access to health care. These conditions can make daily life harder and increase stress among prisoners. The jail is also known for housing many inmates with mental health challenges. Instead of receiving proper medical and psychological care, some prisoners struggle in an environment that can worsen anxiety, depression, or trauma. Without enough support systems, mentally ill inmates may become vulnerable to violence or isolation. Because of these problems, Rikers Island has become a symbol of the larger issues within the American criminal justice system. Human rights organizations, activists, journalists, and political leaders have repeatedly criticized the jail for failing to provide safety, dignity, and rehabilitation for inmates. Investigations and documentaries have exposed stories of mistreatment, fear, and suffering, further strengthening its reputation as one of the harshest jail environments in America. One of the most controversial facts about Rikers Island is that a large number of the people held there have not actually been convicted of a crime. Many inmates are waiting for their court hearings or trials, which means they are legally considered innocent until proven guilty. However, despite not being convicted, they can still spend weeks, months, or even longer inside the jail system. A major reason for this situation is the cash bail system. After an arrest, a judge may set a bail amount that a person must pay in order to stay free while waiting for trial. Wealthy individuals can often pay the money quickly and return home, continue working, and prepare for their legal case comfortably. Poor individuals, however, may not have enough money to pay even small bail amounts. As a result, they remain locked inside jail simply because of their financial condition, not because they were proven guilty. This creates a serious issue of inequality within the justice system. Two people accused of the same crime can experience completely different outcomes depending on their economic status. A rich person may go home the same day, while a poor person may spend months in jail waiting for trial. Critics argue that this system unfairly punishes poverty and places vulnerable communities at a disadvantage. The long wait for court dates also adds to the problem. Courts in large cities often face delays because of overcrowded legal systems, large numbers of cases, and limited resources. During this waiting period, inmates may lose jobs, miss school, struggle financially, or become separated from their families. Parents may be unable to care for their children, and some people lose housing because they cannot pay rent while incarcerated. The emotional and psychological impact can also be severe. Living in a stressful and dangerous environment while not knowing when freedom will come can cause anxiety, depression, fear, and hopelessness. Some inmates may even feel pressured to accept plea deals, admitting guilt for lesser charges, simply to get out of jail faster, even if they believe they are innocent. Young people are especially vulnerable in this situation. Teenagers and young adults who spend time in harsh jail conditions may experience trauma that affects their future education, behavior, and mental health. Instead of rehabilitation, they may become more exposed to violence, gangs, and criminal influence. Human rights groups and legal reform advocates have strongly criticized this issue. They argue that keeping unconvicted individuals in dangerous jail conditions goes against the principle of fairness and justice. Many activists believe the system should focus on alternatives such as supervised release programs, faster court processing, and fairer bail policies to reduce unnecessary imprisonment before trial. Violence has long been one of the biggest and most alarming problems inside Rikers Island. The jail has developed a reputation for being extremely dangerous, with frequent reports of physical fights, gang activity, assaults, intimidation, and abuse. Both inmates and correction officers often live and work in an atmosphere filled with tension and fear, where conflict can happen at any moment. One reason violence becomes so common is the stressful environment inside the jail. Thousands of inmates from different backgrounds, neighborhoods, and criminal histories are placed together in crowded conditions. Many prisoners feel pressure to defend themselves constantly in order to survive. In such an environment, even small disagreements can quickly turn into serious fights. Some inmates join gangs or groups for protection because they fear becoming targets if they remain alone. Gang influence has played a major role in the violence at Rikers Island. Rivalries between groups can lead to attacks, threats, and ongoing conflicts inside housing units. Younger inmates are especially vulnerable because they may be pressured into gangs or forced to follow stronger prisoners for safety. This creates a cycle where fear and aggression become part of daily life. Correction officers have also faced dangerous conditions. Staff members sometimes become victims of inmate attacks, especially during fights or riots. At the same time, the jail has faced criticism and investigations over accusations of excessive force used by some officers against inmates. Reports have described situations where prisoners were physically abused, restrained violently, or denied protection. These allegations have damaged public trust and raised concerns about human rights inside the facility. Violence affects inmates physically and mentally. Injuries from assaults can range from minor wounds to life-threatening harm. However, the emotional damage can be equally serious. Constant exposure to fear, aggression, and threats can lead to anxiety, trauma, depression, and emotional instability. Many inmates describe living in a state of constant alertness, never feeling safe even while sleeping. Young inmates have historically been among the most affected by violence at Rikers. In the past, teenagers housed in the jail were reportedly exposed to high levels of assault and intimidation. Investigations revealed that some younger prisoners suffered repeated attacks from both inmates and staff. These incidents drew national attention and increased criticism of the jail's management and safety policies. Another factor contributing to violence is understaffing and poor supervision. When there are not enough trained officers monitoring inmates, conflicts can escalate quickly. Delayed responses to emergencies may allow assaults to continue longer, increasing the risk of serious injury. In overcrowded housing units, maintaining order becomes even more difficult. The culture of violence inside Rikers Island has been documented by journalists, legal organizations, and government investigations over many years. Reports have described the jail as an environment where brutality became normalized, creating a system driven more by fear and survival than rehabilitation or safety. Critics argue that such conditions fail to protect human dignity and instead deepen anger, trauma, and criminal behavior among inmates. Mental health is one of the most serious and complex issues inside Rikers Island. A large number of inmates held in the jail suffer from mental illnesses such as depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder, and other psychological conditions. Many of these individuals enter the jail already struggling with emotional and mental health challenges, while others develop serious problems because of the stressful and violent conditions inside the facility. For many inmates, jail becomes an extremely difficult environment to survive mentally. The constant noise, overcrowding, fear of violence, isolation from family, and uncertainty about the future can create overwhelming emotional pressure. Living in locked cells, facing threats from other inmates, and dealing with strict routines can increase stress and worsen existing mental illnesses. Inmates often describe feelings of hopelessness, fear, loneliness, and emotional exhaustion. One of the biggest concerns is that many mentally ill inmates do not receive proper treatment or support. Mental health services inside overcrowded jail systems are often limited, understaffed, or unable to meet the needs of thousands of prisoners. Some inmates may wait long periods before seeing a mental health professional, while others may not receive consistent therapy, counseling, or medication management. Without proper care, symptoms can become more severe over time. The use of solitary confinement has also been heavily criticized in relation to mental health. Some inmates with psychological disorders have reportedly been placed in isolation as punishment or for control purposes. Spending long periods alone in small cells with little human interaction can have devastating effects on mental well-being. Experts have warned that isolation can increase anxiety, paranoia, hallucinations, depression, and suicidal thoughts, especially for people already suffering from mental illness. Self-harm and suicide attempts have been major concerns at Rikers Island. Reports over the years have described inmates harming themselves due to emotional distress, trauma, or untreated psychological conditions. The emotional burden of incarceration, combined with fear and uncertainty, can push vulnerable individuals into severe mental crises. These incidents have raised serious questions about whether the jail system is capable of protecting inmates with mental health needs. Many experts argue that jails like Rikers Island have become substitutes for mental health institutions. Instead of receiving treatment in hospitals or community care programs, people with mental illnesses often end up in the criminal justice system. Poverty, homelessness, addiction, and lack of access to health care can increase the chances of mentally ill individuals being arrested and incarcerated rather than medically treated. Correction officers working inside the jail also face mental strain. Constant exposure to violence, stressful situations, and aggressive environments can affect the emotional health of staff members as well. Burnout, stress, anxiety, and trauma are not limited to inmates alone, making the environment difficult for everyone involved. Human rights organizations, medical professionals, and activists have repeatedly called for reforms to improve mental health care inside the jail. They argue that mentally ill individuals need treatment, counseling, rehabilitation, and community support rather than punishment in harsh jail conditions. Critics believe that failing to address mental health properly not only harms inmates, but also increases violence, instability, and suffering throughout the entire correctional system. Rikers Island is often viewed as more than just a correctional facility because it reflects deep social and economic inequalities that exist in American society. Many critics believe the jail shows how poverty, race, lack of education, unemployment, and limited access to healthcare can strongly influence who ends up inside the criminal justice system. The people held at Rikers Island are often from low-income communities and disadvantaged backgrounds, highlighting the connection between inequality and incarceration. One of the clearest examples of inequality is the cash bail system. People who have financial resources can usually pay bail quickly after arrest and continue their lives outside jail while waiting for trial. Poor individuals, however, may remain locked up for weeks or months simply because they cannot afford the required amount. This means freedom can depend more on money than on guilt or innocence. Two people accused of similar crimes may receive completely different treatment based only on their economic status. Many inmates at Rikers come from neighborhoods affected by poverty, unemployment, underfunded schools, and high crime rates. These communities often face fewer opportunities for success and greater exposure to violence and social problems. Lack of educational support, unstable housing, and limited job opportunities can increase the risk of individuals becoming involved in criminal activity or being targeted by law enforcement. Race and ethnicity are also major parts of the discussion surrounding inequality at Rikers Island. Reports and studies have shown that Black and Latino communities are disproportionately represented in the jail population. Critics argue that systemic racism within policing, sentencing practices, and economic systems contributes to these disparities. Many activists believe minority communities are more heavily monitored and more likely to experience aggressive law enforcement practices compared to wealthier or predominantly white neighborhoods. Another issue connected to inequality is access to legal representation. Wealthier defendants can often hire experienced private lawyers who may negotiate reduced charges, lower bail, or faster court resolutions. Poor defendants usually rely on overworked public defenders who may have limited time and resources to handle large numbers of cases. This imbalance can affect the outcome of legal proceedings and increase the chances of extended detention. Mental health and addiction problems also reveal social inequality inside the jail system. Many inmates struggle with substance abuse, trauma, or untreated mental illnesses that developed in environments lacking proper health care and community support. Instead of receiving treatment before problems escalate, many individuals encounter the criminal justice system only after their lives have already become unstable. Family impact is another important aspect of inequality connected to Rikers Island. When parents or caregivers are jailed, families may suffer financially and emotionally. Children may grow up without stable support, increasing the risk of future poverty and social difficulties. In this way, incarceration can continue cycles of hardship across generations. Critics argue that Rikers Island demonstrates how the justice system often punishes vulnerable populations more severely than privileged groups. Wealth, education, social status, and access to resources can strongly shape a person's experience within the legal system. Because of this, many reform advocates believe the problems at Rikers cannot be separated from larger issues such as poverty, discrimination, unequal opportunities, and lack of social support in society. Rikers Island has faced widespread criticism over serious human rights concerns that have been reported for many years. Journalists, legal organizations, activists, medical professionals, and government investigators have all raised alarms about the treatment of inmates inside the jail complex. These concerns focus on issues such as physical abuse, neglect, unsafe living conditions, lack of medical care, excessive force, and violations of basic human dignity. One major concern involves allegations of violence and mistreatment by correction officers. Some reports claim that inmates have experienced unnecessary physical force, harsh punishments, intimidation, and abusive behavior while in custody. In certain cases, investigations revealed incidents where prisoners were beaten or injured during confrontations with staff members. Critics argue that inmates, regardless of the crimes they are accused of, still deserve protection from abuse and should be treated according to legal and human rights standards. Poor living conditions inside the jail have also been heavily criticized. Overcrowded housing units, unsanitary environments, broken facilities, poor ventilation, and inadequate hygiene have all been reported as ongoing problems. Inmates may spend long periods in small cells with limited comfort and little privacy. Such conditions can create physical health risks and increase emotional stress among prisoners. Medical care has been another major area of concern. Some inmates reportedly struggle to receive timely treatment for illnesses, injuries, or chronic health conditions. Delays in medical attention can place prisoners at serious risk, especially those with mental health disorders or severe physical illnesses. Critics argue that denying or delaying healthcare violates basic human rights because incarcerated individuals depend entirely on the jail system for medical support. Food quality and nutrition have also been questioned. Some former inmates and advocacy groups have described meals as inadequate or unhealthy. Limited access to nutritious food can negatively affect both physical and mental health, particularly for prisoners already suffering from stress or medical conditions. The use of solitary confinement has generated strong criticism from human rights organizations. Inmates placed in isolation may spend long hours alone in small spaces with very little social interaction. Experts argue that extended isolation can cause severe psychological harm, including depression, paranoia, anxiety, and emotional breakdowns. Many activists believe solitary confinement should be restricted or eliminated, especially for young inmates and individuals with mental illnesses. Young prisoners have historically faced especially serious risks. Investigations in past years revealed cases where teenage inmates experienced violence, abuse, and neglect while housed at Rikers Island. These reports shocked the public and increased demands for reform. Many people questioned whether minors should ever be placed in such harsh correctional environments. Deaths inside the jail have further intensified human rights concerns. Over the years, inmates have died due to violence, suicide, medical neglect, overdoses, or unsafe conditions. Each death has raised questions about accountability, supervision, and the ability of the jail system to protect human life. Advocacy groups and civil rights organizations argue that prisons and jails should focus on safety, rehabilitation, and humane treatment rather than fear and punishment alone. They believe every person, including inmates, deserves basic rights such as healthcare, safety, dignity, and protection from abuse. Because of these concerns, Rikers Island has become a symbol in national debates about prison reform, criminal justice, and human rights in the United States. Over the years, growing numbers of activists, lawyers, journalists, politicians, community leaders, and ordinary citizens have demanded major reforms for Rikers Island. Many people believe the problems inside the jail have become too serious to ignore, and they argue that the entire system requires deep structural change. Public concern increased after numerous reports of violence, deaths, abuse, overcrowding, and mental health crises inside the facility were exposed through investigations and media coverage. One of the strongest demands from reform advocates is the closure of Rikers Island itself. Critics argue that the jail has developed a culture of violence and neglect that cannot be fixed through small improvements alone. Some activists believe the buildings are outdated, unsafe, and unsuitable for humane incarceration. They argue that closing the jail and replacing it with smaller, modern facilities would create safer conditions for both inmates and staff. Another major area of reform focuses on reducing the jail population. Many reform supporters argue that too many people are incarcerated unnecessarily, especially individuals accused of low-level, non-violent offenses. They believe alternatives such as supervised release programs, community service, electronic monitoring, counseling, and rehabilitation programs could reduce overcrowding and prevent unnecessary detention. The cash bail system has become a central topic in reform discussions. Critics argue that poor individuals should not remain jailed simply because they cannot afford bail money. Reform advocates support policies that allow low-risk defendants to await trial outside jail without financial barriers. They believe this would create a fairer justice system and reduce the number of people held at Rikers before conviction. Mental health reform is also a major demand. Experts and activists argue that many inmates with psychological disorders should receive treatment in medical or community facilities instead of being placed in dangerous jail environments. Calls for increased mental health services, counseling programs, crisis intervention teams, and addiction treatment have become increasingly common. Training and accountability for correction officers are additional reform priorities. Critics believe staff should receive better education in conflict resolution, mental health awareness, de-escalation techniques, and inmate rights. Some advocacy groups have demanded stronger oversight systems to investigate abuse allegations and hold staff accountable for misconduct. Community organizations and civil rights groups have played an important role in raising awareness about conditions inside Rikers Island. Through protests, campaigns, documentaries, public speeches, and legal action, they have pressured government officials to take action. Families of inmates and former prisoners have also shared personal stories to expose the emotional and physical suffering experienced inside the jail. Political leaders in New York City have debated plans to transform or replace the current jail system. Discussions have included proposals for borough-based jails, expanded rehabilitation programs, and investments in social services aimed at preventing crime before incarceration becomes necessary. Supporters of reform argue that focusing on education, housing, healthcare, and employment opportunities could reduce crime rates more effectively than relying heavily on incarceration. Many reform advocates believe the ultimate goal should be a justice system focused on rehabilitation rather than punishment alone. They argue that prisons and jails should help individuals rebuild their lives, address personal struggles, and safely return to society. Rikers Island is often seen as a powerful symbol of the deeper problems within the American criminal justice system. The conditions and controversies surrounding the jail have caused many people to question whether the system truly delivers fairness, equality, rehabilitation, and justice. For critics, Rikers Island represents more than one troubled jail. It reflects structural failures that exist across law enforcement, courts, prisons, mental health care, and social policies throughout the country. One of the biggest issues highlighted by Rikers Island is the problem of mass incarceration. The United States has one of the largest prison populations in the world, and many experts argue that too many people are placed in jails and prisons instead of receiving social support, education, or rehabilitation. Rikers demonstrates how overcrowded correctional systems can create environments filled with violence, stress, neglect, and instability. The jail also exposes concerns about fairness in the legal process. Many inmates at Rikers are awaiting trial and have not been convicted of crimes, yet they may spend long periods in harsh conditions simply because they cannot afford bail. This situation has led critics to argue that the justice system can punish poverty rather than focusing solely on guilt or innocence. Wealthier individuals often have greater access to legal resources, private attorneys, and financial options that help them avoid prolonged detention. Another major issue connected to Rikers Island is the treatment of vulnerable populations. Many inmates struggle with mental illness, addiction, trauma, homelessness, or poverty before entering jail. Instead of receiving healthcare or community support, these individuals often become trapped within the criminal justice system. Critics argue that prisons and jails are increasingly being used to manage social problems that should be addressed through medical treatment, housing assistance, education, and social services. The violence and abuse reported inside Rikers also raise serious questions about the purpose of incarceration. Ideally, correctional facilities are supposed to maintain safety, protect rights, and encourage rehabilitation. However, when inmates experience fear, assault, neglect, or psychological harm, many people believe the system fails to achieve these goals. Some experts argue that violent prison environments can actually increase anger, trauma, and future criminal behavior instead of helping individuals improve their lives. Racial inequality is another issue closely linked to the discussion surrounding Rikers Island. Studies and reports have shown that minority communities, particularly Black and Latino populations, are disproportionately represented in the jail system. Critics argue that unequal policing practices, poverty, limited opportunities, and systemic discrimination contribute to these imbalances. Because of this, Rikers has become part of a larger national debate about race and equality in the justice system. The jail also reflects concerns about accountability and government responsibility. Investigations into inmate deaths, abuse allegations, and unsafe conditions have raised questions about oversight within correctional institutions. Critics believe authorities have sometimes failed to respond quickly enough to ongoing problems, allowing harmful conditions to continue for years. Many reform advocates believe Rikers Island demonstrates the need for a different approach to justice, one that emphasizes prevention, rehabilitation, mental health care, education, and community support instead of relying heavily on punishment and incarceration. They argue that addressing the root causes of crime, such as poverty, addiction, lack of opportunity, and untreated mental illness, would create a safer and more effective system for society as a whole. Because of its history and reputation, Rikers Island has become a national example used in discussions about prison reform, human rights, inequality, and the future of criminal justice in America.